There is a recording that does not officially exist. A merchant frigate, 3,000 souls aboard, transmits one final message 7 seconds before the fold. The captain's voice is calm. He has done this jump 100 times. He does not know the steersman aboard the Hayliner above him has just convulsed in his Melange tank. He does not know the navigator's prescient vision has gone dark. He only knows that the engines have begun their familiar hum, and the stars beyond his viewport have begun to bend in that particular beautiful way they always do. 7 seconds later, the ship is gone. Not destroyed, not lost in transit, gone. 3 months later, deep in the Canopus Drift, a Guild salvage tug finds the frigate intact, hull unbroken, lights still glowing on emergency power. Every passenger inside has been fused into the bulkheads at the molecular level, hands extruding from walls, faces half merged with deck plating, their mouths are open. Some of them, the medical examiners will later confirm in a sealed Guild report, are still alive. This is what happens when you fold space without a navigator. This is the truth the Spacing Guild does not advertise. The secret encoded in every transit fee. The reason why a single mutated human curled inside a tank of orange gas is worth more to the Imperium than a fleet of warships. Because the moment you fold space, you are not traveling. You are dissolving into a chaotic intersection of every possible dimension that has ever been or ever will be. And the only thing keeping your atoms in the correct order, the correct sequence, the correct universe, is one human mind holding the line against infinity. So tonight, we are going to pull back the curtain on the most terrifying paradox in Frank Herbert's universe. We're going to ask the question the Spacing Guild has spent 10,000 years burying. If folding space is instant, if it is mathematically perfect, if the engines do all the work, then why, in a universe of trillions of souls, are navigators the most expensive asset ever born? The answer is going to terrify you. Because the reality of fold space is not a tunnel. It is not a wormhole. It is not a shortcut. It is a brief, catastrophic collapse of reality itself. And the Guild has been selling you the illusion that this is normal. To understand why a navigator exists, you must first understand what the Holtzman Effect actually is. And just as importantly, what it is not. In the textbooks of Salusa Secundus, in the engineering schools of Ix, in the polished propaganda of the Spacing Guild itself, the Holtzman Effect is described as a kind of bridge, a geometric trick. You fold the fabric of space the way a child folds a piece of paper. You punch a needle through both points, and you arrive instantly at the other side. Clean, elegant, inevitable. This explanation is a live omission. The Holtzman Effect is not a bridge. It is a localized collapse of physical constants. When a Highliner's engines engage, they do not bend space outward. They cancel space. For a fraction of a moment that no instrument has ever successfully measured, the volume of space occupied by the ship ceases to obey the laws that govern the rest of the universe. The speed of light becomes negotiable. Causality becomes optional. The very dimensions that hold the cargo of three-dimensional matter together loosen their grip. And in that moment, the ship is no longer in any one place. It is in every place. All possible coordinates, all possible velocities, all possible futures and pasts and parallel iterations bloom open like an obscene flower. The mathematics of this state is what physicists in the post-Jihad era call the manifold of probability collapse. And it is, in theory, the most beautiful equation ever written. In theory, because the equation has a problem. The equation is perfect for a single point of mass. Calculate the entry coordinate, calculate the exit coordinate, and the manifold will resolve, eventually, into one of those two states. But the moment you put biological matter inside that bubble, the moment you introduce living cargo that is itself made of trillions of interconnected atoms, each with their own quantum states, the manifold does not resolve cleanly. It tries to, it wants to, but it has too many variables, and the variables do not stop screaming. This is the heart of the paradox. The fold is mathematically perfect. the cargo is biologically vulnerable. And in the gap between perfection and vulnerability, ships are eaten alive. The early records of the pre-Guild era, the years before House Carino consolidated its dependence on the navigators, are filled with these failures. Navigation machines, the great thinking computers of the pre-Jihad period, were used to calculate jumps. They were faster than any human, more precise than any human. They could compute trajectories to 20 decimal places in a quarter of a second. And yet, by the most generous estimates in the Imperial Archives, 4 out of every 10 ships that engaged a Holtzman drive under purely computational guidance never arrived. 4 out of 10. Imagine boarding a passenger liner today and being told there is a 40% chance you will not be reassembled at the destination. Imagine the cargo manifests, the condolence letters, the whole industries built around ensuring against atomic dispersal. The mathematicians of that era could not understand it. They ran the calculations again. They ran them on better machines. They ran them through what they believed were error-free quantum verifiers. The numbers always came back the same. The fold should work. The ships should arrive. And yet, the wreckage kept tumbling out of fold space into random star systems centuries after launch, hulls inverted, crews displaced into walls, nameplates from ships that had not yet been built. Here is the cruelty of the math. Even with the most advanced thinking machine ever constructed, the chance of any individual jump failing was less than 1 in a billion per cubic meter of cargo. Statistically negligible, practically inevitable. Because a hayliner is not a cubic meter. A hayliner is 20 kilometers long, packed with planets worth of matter, threading itself through a state where every cubic meter must roll the dice independently. 1 billion to 1, multiplied by the volume of the ship, becomes a certainty. Every jump, every time. Without a pilot who can do something the machine cannot, every transit is a guarantee of catastrophe, waiting for the law of large numbers to find it. So the question becomes, what can a human do that a thinking machine cannot? What is the missing variable in the equation? And why did the entire Imperium, after the Butlerian Jihad burned the machines from the stars, decide that the answer to that question was not to build a better calculator, but to grow a better human? To answer that, we have to step inside the fold itself. We have to ask what is actually happening in those microseconds between departure and arrival that no thinking machine can navigate through. What we are about to describe is, by the explicit admission of every Guild Navigator who has ever spoken on the subject, untranslatable into ordinary human language. But the closest description, drawn from fragmentary writings recovered from the early steersmen and from the prescient visions of figures like Paul Atreides and Leto II, goes something like this. When a ship enters fold space, the passengers do not experience a tunnel. They do not experience a flash of light. They experience, for an instant that does not exist in any normal frame of reference, every possible version of themselves. The you that took the trip, the you that stayed home, the you that died in childbirth on a planet you have never heard of, the you that became emperor, the you that was never born. All of these versions, all of these timelines exist simultaneously inside the fold, and they are all trying to be the version that arrives. This is not metaphor. This is the literal mechanic of the Holtzman state. Inside the fold, the manifold of probability is a kind of choir, and every voice in that choir is screaming to become real. The ship, the passengers, the cargo are not traveling. They are being chosen, selected, atom by atom, from an infinite catalog of possible configurations. And here is where the horror lives. Because the catalog does not care about coherence, most of those infinite configurations are not survivable. Most of them produce a passenger whose left arm has resolved as the right arm of a passenger from a parallel timeline. Most of them produce a ship whose hull has fused with the hull of a vessel that was destroyed 3,000 years ago. Most of them produce a being who arrives screaming a language no living tongue has ever spoken, with memories of a life that did not happen in this universe. This is what the Guild calls atomic dispersal, and the term is a polite euphemism. Atomic dispersal does not mean your atoms are scattered across space. It means your atoms have been issued conflicting instructions about which version of you they belong to, and the universe, indifferent and infinite, has chosen for them. The salvage records of the Guild contain accounts that have been classified for 10,000 years. Ships found drifting with passengers fused into one another, sharing organs, sharing skin. Their faces stretched across multiple bodies. Ships found with only static where the crew used to be. The air thick with what looked like television snow, but was, on close examination, the disassembled and reassembled probability waves of 300 human beings. Ships found empty, but with logs full of decades of entries written by people who were never recorded as boarding. There is a famous case from the early years of the Guild, often cited in private among steersmen as a cautionary tale, of a ship that arrived with its passengers technically alive, but with all of their dreams running backward. They could remember their futures and not their pasts. They knew how they would die, but not where they had been born. Within a month, every one of them committed suicide because their consciousness could not navigate a present whose direction had been reversed. This is the in-between. This is the chaos. And this is why a thinking machine cannot solve the problem. A thinking machine, no matter how sophisticated, processes the manifold as data. It sees a set of possible outcomes, weights them by probability, selects the most likely. But the manifold is not a set. The manifold is alive. It does not present itself as a list of options to be ranked. It presents itself as a flood of simultaneous realities. And the act of measurement, the act of trying to choose, changes which realities are available to choose from. A thinking machine, faced with this, does what thinking machines do. It calculates. It picks the highest probability outcome. And in 9 cases out of 10, the highest probability outcome is not the surviving outcome, because the manifold is biased toward configurations that are simpler than coherent biological matter. Simpler means dust. Simpler means static. Simpler means death. What is needed is not calculation. What is needed is recognition. A mind that can look into the chaos and feel before any data has been processed, which thread leads to a coherent ship arriving at a coherent destination with a coherent crew. A mind that does not measure the manifold, but rides it. A mind that, in some impossible way, has been here before, has seen the arrival before the departure, has known the safe path the way a salmon knows the river. A mind that does not navigate by knowing where it is going, but by knowing where it has already been, even though it has not yet left. This is prescience, and this is why the navigators exist. A navigator, in the strict technical sense, is not a pilot. The word pilot implies steering, and navigators do not steer. The Highliner's engines do all the steering, the Holtzman drives do all the folding, the mathematics, the machinery, the instruments, none of those require a navigator to function. What requires a navigator is the moment of choosing. When a Highliner enters fold space, when the manifold of probability blooms open and the ship is suspended across infinite possible outcomes, the navigator's role is not to drive the ship to safety. The navigator's role is to perceive, in that instant of suspended reality, which of the infinite possible outcomes is the one in which the ship arrives intact. And by perceiving it, by holding it in their consciousness, by recognizing it among the screaming chorus of alternatives, they pin reality to that single thread. It is closer to anchoring than to navigating. It is closer to prayer than to engineering. The mechanism that makes this possible is the spice. Melange, the geriatric awareness narcotic harvested only on Arrakis, the most valuable substance in the known universe. In ordinary doses, Melange extends life and sharpens the senses. In the doses consumed by a guild steersman, Melange does something else entirely. It saturates the nervous system. It rewires the relationship between consciousness and time. A human steeped in spice for years, decades, in some cases centuries, no longer experiences the present as a single moment. They experience it as a tapestry of overlapping possibilities, a fan of futures and pasts, with the present moment as only one of many threads they can pull on. This is prescience. And in the ordinary world, prescience is a curse, because no human mind was ever meant to perceive multiple timelines simultaneously while still trying to function in one of them. But inside a haliner, inside the manifold of fold space, prescience is not a curse. Prescience is the only sense capable of perceiving what is actually happening. The navigator does not see space, they see paths. They see the threads of possibility branching outward from the ship like the limbs of a luminous tree, and they see, with a clarity no thinking machine could ever match, which branches end in safe arrival and which branches end in atomic dispersal. They see the obstacles, not as physical objects, but as temporal shadows. A star that the ship will collide with 3 seconds after the fold completes. A gravitational anomaly that has not yet formed in this timeline, but will form during the transit. The wake of another haliner that folded through the same coordinates 1,000 years from now. All of these are visible to the navigator in the prescient trance as variations on a single woven cloth. And the navigator's task is to find the thread that does not lead to a tangle. Contrast this with what a thinking machine would have to do. The machine would have to enumerate every possible outcome, assign each a probability, and select the optimal path. But the outcomes are infinite. The probabilities shift in real time as other outcomes resolve. And the optimization function itself depends on values that the machine cannot know in advance. What does optimal mean inside the manifold? Optimal for the cargo, for the schedule, for the ship's structural integrity? Each of these requires a different calculation, and they conflict. And the conflict cannot be resolved by data alone. The navigator does not solve this problem. The navigator dissolves it. Because the navigator does not weigh outcomes, the navigator simply knows, in the way a fish knows the current, which thread is the safe one. The recognition is intuitive, immediate, and untranslatable. If you asked a steersman to explain how he chose the path, he could not. He would say that the path was the path. He would say that the others were not real. This is why the navigator is not a pilot. A pilot makes decisions. A navigator perceives the decision that has already been made by the structure of the universe and aligns the ship with it. And this is why no machine can ever do the job. Not because machines lack power, not because they lack speed, but because the recognition required is not computational. It is not even, in the strictest sense, conscious. It is something deeper, something older, something that emerges from the fusion of biological consciousness with prescient awareness. And that fusion is the one thing the manifold of fold space cannot fool, cannot trick, cannot resolve into a wrong answer. This is what the guild guards, this is what they hide behind the orange gas of the Melange tanks, behind the encrypted star charts, behind the centuries-long apprenticeships and the surgically isolated highliner bridges. Not technology, not algorithms, not a secret formula. A type of consciousness, a way of being human that the rest of the human species has forgotten how to access, and that the guild has perfected through the most brutal biological discipline ever inflicted on a single human body. Because the navigator's gift is not free. It is the most expensive currency in the Imperium, and the price is paid in flesh. To become a navigator is to cease, in any meaningful sense, to be human. A young candidate, selected from the guild's secret breeding lines, begins exposure to melange in childhood. The doses escalate over decades. By the time the candidate is admitted to the rank of steersman, they have consumed more spice than a planetary aristocrat would burn through in 20 lifetimes. The body responds the only way biology can respond to that level of saturation. It changes. The skin loses pigment, then loses texture, then begins to thin. The limbs atrophy because they are no longer needed. The lungs adapt to breathe pure spice gas, which is necessary because the prescient trance can only be sustained at concentrations that would kill an ordinary human in seconds. The skull elongates to accommodate a brain that is being asked to process information across multiple timelines simultaneously. By the time a navigator reaches the third stage, the highest rank, what floats inside the orange tank no longer resembles a human being. It resembles, depending on the witness, a fish, a fetus, or something glimpsed in a dream that the dreamer chose not to remember. The steersman Edric, who attended the conclave around Paul Muad'Dib, was described by Princess Irulan as a thing of webbed fingers and enormous lidless eyes. His body suspended in a cloud of cinnamon orange vapor, speaking through a translator, because his vocal cords had long since adapted to a frequency no unaltered human ear could parse. And Edric was not the most extreme. He was, by guild standards, a relatively young navigator. This is the cost. Every transit you have ever taken in the Imperium, every shipment of food, every diplomatic envoy, every Sardaukar deployment, every grain of spice that left Arrakis depended on a creature like Edric curled inside a tank, his consciousness stretched across infinite possible outcomes, holding the line against the chaos. And the Guild knew exactly what they had. For 10,000 years, the Spacing Guild operated as one of the three pillars of the Imperium, alongside the Landsraad of the Great Houses and the Padishah Emperor on the Golden Lion throne. The Guild did not own armies. It did not own planets. It did not, on the surface, own anything at all. What it owned was the only working answer to the folded space paradox. Without Guild Navigators, the Imperium fragments. Each planet becomes an island. Trade collapses. Communication slows to the speed of light, which means it might as well stop entirely. The Emperor on Kaitain cannot reach his Sardaukar legions. The Great Houses cannot reach their fiefs. The Bene Gesserit cannot move their Reverend Mothers. The Chom Company cannot move its goods. Every political, religious, and economic structure built across 10,000 years of human civilization depends on one thing: the Guild's monopoly on coherent transit. And this was the great quiet joke of the Imperium. The Emperor sat on the throne. The Great Houses fought their wars. The Bene Gesserit pulled their genetic strings. But none of them could move without the Guild. So all of them paid astronomical sums. Sums denominated not in Solaris, but in spice itself. Because spice was the only currency the Guild ultimately needed, and the only currency they would accept for the most sensitive transit contracts. The Guild's leverage was so absolute that they were able to enforce across the entire Imperium a single inviolable rule. No house, no planet, no power was permitted to develop alternative transit. Anyone caught researching the Holtzman Effect with the goal of duplicating navigator capabilities had their planet struck from the Haliner manifests. The threat was not military. The threat was isolation. A planet without Guild access, starved within a generation. This is why House Atreides, even at the height of its power, could not openly challenge the Guild. This is why House Harkonnen, even with all of its corruption, paid Guild fees on time and in full. This is why the Bene Gesserit, with their long view of history, treated the Guild not as a rival, but as a force of nature, something to be navigated around rather than confronted. But this monopoly came with a hidden vulnerability, and Paul Atreides was the first being in 10,000 years to perceive it. Because the Guild's leverage depended on Melange, and Melange came only from Arrakis, and the moment a being could threaten to destroy Arrakis, the entire Guild apparatus, the entire Imperium, became hostage to that threat. When Paul stood before the Emperor and the Guild representatives at the end of the first novel, when he made his famous threat to obliterate the spice if his demands were not met, he was not threatening a commodity. He was threatening to atomize every highliner in transit. He was threatening to fold every traveling ship into the manifold and never let them out. Because without spice, no navigator. Without navigator, no anchor. Without anchor, every ship currently in fold space dissolves into the chorus of impossible alternatives. The Guild representatives in that room understood this immediately. They were the only ones in the throne room who fully grasped what Paul was actually saying. And that is why, in the silence of that confrontation, it was the Guild that broke first, not the Emperor. A monopoly that powerful is never as stable as it appears. It is built on a single biological dependency. And as Paul demonstrated, and as Leto II would later weaponize across his 3,500-year reign, that dependency is the most fragile thing in the universe. So we return, at the end, to the question we started with. Why, in a universe of impossible technology, of ships that fold space, and shields that turn aside lasguns, and minds bred for prescient awareness, does survival come down to a single human being? The easy answer is that the Butlerian Jihad, the great war that ended 10,000 years before Paul Atreides was born, made it so. The Jihad outlawed thinking machines. The Orange Catholic Bible carried forward the commandment that became the spine of human civilization for the next 10 millennia. Thou shalt not make a machine in the likeness of a human mind. And from that prohibition, all the strange institutions of the Imperium grew. The Mentats, who replaced computers with conditioned human cognition. The Bene Gesserit, who replaced genetic algorithms with breeding programs. The Suk Doctors, the Sword Masters, and the Navigators, who replaced navigation computers with prescient human consciousness. But this is only half the answer. Because Frank Herbert was not making a simple argument about the dangers of artificial intelligence. He was making a deeper argument, one that runs through every page of every Dune novel about what consciousness actually is, and why it cannot be replicated by any process that does not begin with biological life. The thinking machine, in Herbert's universe, is not evil because it is intelligent. It is dangerous because its intelligence is hollow. A machine processes, a machine calculates, a machine resolves problems by reducing them to their components and finding optimal solutions. But the manifold of fold space is not a problem with components. The manifold is a totality. It is reality experienced from the inside all at once, and no process that operates by decomposition can perceive it. Only consciousness can. Only the strange, indivisible, inexplicable thing that happens when a brain looks at the world and somehow, impossibly, holds it whole. The navigator, in his orange tank, his body atrophied, his mind stretched across timelines, is doing nothing more than what every conscious being does in every waking moment. He is holding reality together by the simple act of perceiving it. He is just doing it under conditions where the failure to perceive correctly means atomic annihilation. This is the deeper paradox that Herbert plants beneath the visible one. The folded space paradox is not really about transit. It is about the fundamental insufficiency of mechanism. A universe that runs purely on calculation is a universe that does not survive its own complexity. Somewhere in the loop, a conscious mind has to step in and choose, has to recognize, has to know, without being able to explain how, which thread is the right one. This is why the Navigators are not the only prescient figures in the Dune universe, and why the others matter. Paul Atreides, walking the golden path of futures and pasts. Leto II, his preborn consciousness reaching backward across the millennia. The Reverend Mothers, accessing the other memory of all their ancestors. The Mentats, performing in their conditioned minds what computers used to do, but doing it inside the warm context of a living awareness. All of them, in their different ways, are illustrations of the same idea. That consciousness is not a feature added on top of intelligence. Consciousness is the substrate that makes any kind of meaningful intelligence possible. And the folded space paradox is the proof. The most powerful machines ever built cannot solve a problem that a sufficiently saturated human mind solves intuitively hundreds of times a day on every Hayliner transit in the Imperium. Not because the machines are weak, because the problem itself is shaped like consciousness, and only consciousness can fit into it. There is a quiet tragedy in this, because the Navigators pay a terrible price for their gift. They lose their bodies, they lose their humanity in any recognizable sense. They become, by the third stage, alien creatures, suspended in cinnamon clouds, communicating through translators, perceiving a universe most humans will never see. And they do this so that the rest of humanity can continue to move, to trade, to live, to have any kind of civilization at all. In the great imperial economy, the navigator is the most expensive variable. But in the deeper sense, the navigator is the proof that some things are not for sale. The thing that holds the ship together inside fold space is not technology. It is not money. It is not power. It is the simple, terrible, irreplaceable fact of a human mind perceiving the universe and refusing to let it fly apart. Frank Herbert, who spent his life writing about the dangers of leaders, of saviors, of charismatic figures who promise to solve everything, gave us, in the Navigators, an image of what humanity actually owes its civilization to. Not the great men, not the prophets, the hidden ones, the mutated ones, the bodies dissolving in tanks of orange gas, holding the line so that the rest of us can travel between the stars and never know what it cost. So the next time someone tells you that folded space is instant, that travel between stars is a solved problem, that the technology has reduced the galaxy to a comfortable village, remember the recording that does not officially exist. Remember the merchant frigate, fused into its own bulkheads, its passengers still screaming. Remember that in the universe Frank Herbert built, instant is the most dangerous word in the dictionary, and the only thing slower than light is the human soul's ability to stay whole. That is what the navigators are guarding. Not the cargo, not the schedule,